Welcome to today's panel discussion, part of our series throughout the year charting the progress and the challenges around constructing a circular economy for flexible packaging. Previously, we've talked about design for recyclability, aligning around guidelines and technological pathways from recyclable packaging to sorting and recycling systems that can deliver good quality recyclates back into the high value applications that they need to go into. This time, we're going to be focusing on the equally important parallel problem of ensuring that the economic foundations are in place to get flexible packaging moving around that loop. The challenge, I suppose, is that the costs involved in collection and recycling tend to exceed the market value of recycled materials. And that's where extended producer responsibility comes in. This feels like a good time to address the subject of EPR. It's coming just after the launch of position statements by the Consumer Goods Forum and also by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation just this Tuesday this week on EPR. Today we'll be taking stock on the role that EPR currently plays, looking at the strengths and weaknesses of existing schemes, and thinking about the conditions that could enable them to have a better impact in the future. I'm delighted today to be joined by 4 speakers with a great deal more knowledge than myself on this topic, and coming from 4 different perspectives. We have Graham Houlder. He is project coordinator of CEFLEX, the Flexible Packaging Value Chain Initiative to build a circular economy for flexibles in Europe. Archana Jaganatha is Senior Director for Sustainability in Packaging at PepsiCo. Monica Battistella is Product and Sustainability Manager at Taghleef Industries, which is a major producer of flexible packaging. And last but not least, we have Chris Bruijnes, MD of KIDV, the Netherlands Institute for Sustainable Packaging. And Chris has a close-up view of how EPR is working at the moment in the Netherlands. Thanks everyone for participating in today's discussion, and welcome. Before we start, I'd like, as usual, to remind the audience that we welcome your engagement in the form of comments and questions that you can share via the chat box on the right of the screen. I've also used this chat to share some links that you may find useful. Among those, you will find at the top of the box statements from CEFLEX itself, Consumer Goods Forum, and Ellen MacArthur Foundation on EPR. So certainly recommend you check those out afterwards, and also the LinkedIn profiles of all of today's speakers so you can connect with them. So I'd like to start today's discussion by reminding ourselves how EPR is supposed to work in theory. Chris, I'd like to start with you. Could you just give us a bit of an overview of the purpose of EPR and how it functions?
Well, originally EPR was started as a scheme to get the individual companies responsible for their products on the market and make them responsible for well, a sustainable treatment of collection, sorting, recycling of materials they produce. But as we see in Europe, in many countries, there are different schemes coming out of that, and some are individual, some are competitive, and some are collective. And as in the Netherlands, we have a system called afvalfondsverpakking, which is a collective mode of an EPR scheme. And even within these different possibilities of how it is executed, we see a different approaches in the manner in which the EPR schemes interfere in the market. And the laziest one is that you just pay for collecting, sorting and recycling. And the most proactive one is that you also invest in innovations heading for a better quality in collection, sorting and recycling. And they're all in betweens.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. So Graham, as I mentioned, CEFLEX has a statement, a position statement on your website, which I've linked to for the audience. I guess you will have had time to digest the recent statements by CGF and EMF on the same topic. would you be in alignment with their position on EPR? Oh, Graham, you're muted.
Thanks, Tim. Yeah, of course, we're aligned with the CGF, the Consumer Goods Forum, and the Ellen MacArthur positions on EPR. What they are is really recognizing the important role that EPR plays in getting materials back when they become waste, and collecting, sorting, and recycling them so that they don't leak into the environment. Also to try and preserve the materials that some of which are not renewable. I think where we are, having been lucky to operate in a European environment where EPR is basically the standard in all countries, very different forms, as Chris alluded to, but it's been geared, the EPR systems that we operate today are geared to meeting the legal targets for the different materials to meet the required recycling rate. So they funded to a certain level. If we want to go circular, it's a very different picture. Right now, EPR packaging, flexible packaging pays EPR fees, and depending on which country you're in, you sometimes get collected, sometimes you don't get collected, sometimes you get sorted, and sometimes you even get recycled. But the money that goes into the pot isn't necessarily used to recycle flexible packaging. And this is one of the fundamental differences between an EPR system which is funded to meet targets versus an EPR system which is funded to make all materials circular.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. So yes, we'll focus on what we can do to make the EPR landscape more functional and target-driven in terms of our overall circular economy objectives in the course of this discussion. So I'd like to get a couple of value chain perspectives from this. Archana first, how does EPR impact on your organizational strategy? How do you interact with it? How does it change the way you think?
Great, thanks, Tim, and it's great to be here. Look, ultimately, as a brand owner, it's not rocket science. We want two things. We want our packaging to not leak into the environment. We want it to be recycled. And we want an efficient and transparent mechanism of making sure that that happens. And EPR, as Chris alluded to, the objective of the EPR was to do exactly that. Now, PepsiCo is part of EPR schemes in 23 different European countries, but there's a spectrum from passive to active, right? We could just be passive and say we're paying the money and then the PRO does what the PRO needs to do. But that's not the position that we want to take. You know, besides the financial contribution, we want to be able to contribute time and resources to take part in the board of directors of the company where applicable. We participate in dedicated scheme projects of different packaging organizations like the CTO PP Club, because exactly as Graham alluded to, right, we don't want to pay into a pot that just recycles plastic in the country overall. We also want to make sure that the streams for our specific types of plastic packaging are developed, and that requires time and resource and you know, commitment to make sure that those are developed into those circular streams. So overall, really important part of our plan, and we want to be active and not a passive participant in the EPR system.
Thanks very much, Archana. And Monica, really the same question to you. How do you interface with EPR in your role?
Thank you, Tim, for the question. Yes, we are a producer of flexible packaging, and of course, what we have in mind when we are supporting our customers and their customers, their final customers, what we have in mind is the end of life. So we are not putting packaging in the market just you know, to have further littering. So we need to be conscious of the EPR systems. We need to be conscious of how different systems are working in the markets where we are present. And since we are a company which has a global footprint, of course, being located here in Europe, we have a very good knowledge of what is happening in Europe. and EPR systems here in Europe. But even within such a small country, a small region, in comparison maybe to Latin America, North America, or other areas, there are many differences among different EPR systems. So sometimes it's the packaging producer who's paying the bill, so is paying the fee. In other countries, it's the filler, and it's the importer who's paying the bill. So it is very difficult when you talk to customers and they ask for your support, because customers, it's not that they are working and selling in their own country. Most of them are exporting. Some of them are exporting at a larger extent. Others have only limited volumes, which go for export. But nonetheless, they need to have a clear idea, which unfortunately now at present, it's not really available. And as also Archana and even the previous Chris and Graham mentioned, it is necessary that we do not stick to the state of the art, so to what is feasible now, but to work in perspective, to make use of the fees, to improve on the current technologies, and to make sure that what we put on the market, we have our efforts to make sure that it is compatible and reflecting the guidelines or the requirements of laws, like it happens in Germany for sure. But it is also needed an additional effort on the other side to make sure then that the packaging is really collected, sorted, and recycled.
Thanks, Monica. So I think even in our just initial survey of the EPR landscape, a number of shortcomings have already emerged. As always in these discussions, we like to be constructive and to identify problems and opportunities to fix them. So that's what we're going to look at in the remainder of this discussion. Graham, in the 5 minutes that we were having a little chat before we went live, Graham framed this in a way that I really appreciated. So I'm going to steal his metaphor now. And he was talking about how the packaging value chain, the collection infrastructure, and the recycling are basically operating as three different economies that are totally separate from each other. And Graham described the EPR as basically the glue which connects them all together, or at least that's how it should act. And Chris, in his opening comments, alluded to the fact that EPR systems have been around for about a quarter of a century. And as we all know, our thinking about packaging waste was framed in a very different way back in the 1990s with the European legislation at the time. So let's think about how we can update EPR and make it fit for purpose and for the circular economy goals that we're all pursuing at the moment. Graham, you began to talk about how we need it to be a lot more targeted towards moving materials around that loop. Could you build on that? How would you like to see the EPR landscape changing in order to help realize the big CEFLEX challenge that you're leading?
It's a very interesting and complex challenge, and I wouldn't like to try and simplify it, but I think there are some probably 3 or 4 lead directions where we need to see big changes. The first is on the funding. We shouldn't have to make a choice between what gets collected, sorted, and recycled. If we're going circular, you need to do it all. That means that glass pays for glass, paper pays for paper, metals pay for metals, plastics probably pay rigid and flexible separately, because they are such a different proposition and the challenges are quite different, and the recycling infrastructures are also to some degree quite different. So that's quite a different picture. Excuse me. So that's the first part. I'm sorry, excuse me. The second part is that, as you alluded to earlier, the collecting, sorting, and recycling, when you sell the final product, those costs aren't necessarily for all materials positive. In fact, for very resource efficient materials like flexible packaging, there is a cost differential, probably equal to the price of the virgin, sometimes even higher. So for you to put a recycled material back onto the market and expect people to use it when they have virgin on their doorstep, which they've been using for years, it has to be cost competitive. So you have to make these recycled materials sustainable, which means artificially supporting or tracing the cost of these materials so that they become cost competitive against virgin. We want to get to the stage where the purchasers say, I want to use the recycled material of the right quality, and it's always going to be cheaper than virgin. And that's a very different costing model to the one that's operating anywhere in Europe today. Right now, it's a supply and demand, and we know what happens with the virgin plastics price linked to the oil price. It goes up and down. So that's the second part. The third point is that as you collect all these materials, you have a lot more materials in the system, actually a finite amount, because you only put so much onto the market. And then you say, well, who's going to use all of these materials? What qualities do they need, and what quantities? And the recyclers are going to have different capabilities to deliver the different qualities. Right now we have a big issue with mechanical recycling, is that it can't deliver food contact and some certain of the other functional requirements. We also know after a certain number of cycles, the plastics are going to need to be renewed, and we have chemical recycling, which is hopefully going to scale quickly. So every type of recycler has a certain way to go. So because there are limited quantities of materials coming back from the market, the role of EPR is going to have to manage these material flows so that one part of the collection, sorting, recycling stream doesn't capture all the materials and we end up with too much of one and not enough of the other. And so I see those are basically the three key areas where change is needed. The reason why EPR becomes the glue is because it creates the level playing field such that when Archana puts her products on the market and she's doing the right thing, she's not at a disadvantage to some of her competitors, because they cost more. That shouldn't be the case. Doing the right thing should always be cost sustainable as well. Mm-hmm. EPR has a key role in doing that.
Okay.
Chris, do you want to respond to that?
Well, I think it's a very good perspective view what Graham is putting forward. I would even extend it a little bit more by saying, well, if we really want to get circularity in our schemes, probably, and that's also done in the Netherlands, also in Belgium, I suppose, that we also interact with the government, how they can play a role in the whole target we are heading for. If you look at prices of virgin materials and the differences and the flexibility of the prices in the markets, I think there has to be some intervention also from the governments, maybe from the European government, in terms of getting the prices more on a level playing field with the recyclates. Or, for example, have an obligation of using a certain amount of recycled material in the new products, which is also at the moment currently in the discussion. And in our country, we do not exactly know what kind of polymers are put on the market connected with the different sub-markets or different products. We only ask people to get figures in terms of the amount of tons or kilos of plastics. So we don't know whether it's PE or PET or high DPE or PP. So if we want to interfere in the market and we want to get the right incentives there, we should also be aware that we have to ask the producers and important more data to get the steering wheel available for us. But before, I think a lot of possible solutions are not implemented because we are not exactly know where the streams are, how big the streams can be, how can we work together on an international basis with different polymer streams to get the racing class on the right track, what kind of standards we should use to get these polymers on the market in such a way that if you buy it, you know what kind of quality you buy, because I think a lot of companies are reluctant to buy the racing class because they don't know the stuff well enough. It smells a little bit and it has some disadvantages, so they take their hands off. So there's a lot to do in terms of more data, more interference together with the government, and get more money also available for innovation instead of just paying the sorting recycling market, which goes to the lowest costs. Because if you have a lowest cost procedure, and that is also currently in the Netherlands discussion, if you have the lowest cost procedure, you go to the quantities and you agree with the lower quality. Because I can make a lot of racing class with a low quality, and I have my tons available in 2025, 2030, but I make rubbish. So that's I think the future steps would be choose for quality and choose for working together with the governments on new level playing fields, and get more data available.
Thank you. Archana, Monica, anything you'd like to build on those ideas?
Yes, so I'd like to pick up on the point that Chris was making about government. I know we're talking about EPR in this discussion, but EPR is not the fix-it for all problems unless it operates within a legislative framework that enables the EPR to do the right thing and drive for a circular economy. And specific things from a legislative perspective are ambitious plastic recycling targets, right? And plastic recycling targets ideally by type of material. In theory, if you have a low target, you could probably just achieve it by recycling PET and other sort of high value materials, and you'd never get to the hard to recycle materials. So the legislative framework, the targets that the government sets is super important. The second is the end-to-end accountability of the packaging recovery organization. So I'll copy Chris's term. The PROs need to have the permission to engage throughout the value chain, including with engaging with the recycling operations to look at what is the quality of bales they need to produce the final recyclate to then serve the end market. And then the legislative framework also needs to drive greater transparency on the recycling rates of different packaging types. So I think overall, I would say the foundation of it is making sure that the government organizations actually set the right framework that enables EPR to operate more efficiently. And that's why I think this whole idea of the harmonized EU measure is so interesting, because hopefully it does that and it avoids this issue of different schemes, different models operating in different markets, which makes it very complicated for a brand owner like us that may use one design and one packaging for multiple countries, but then now we have to cater to like 10 different systems that our products go into. So I think this sort of overall harmonization of EPR that comes from a unified legislative framework is important. And then, of course, after that, within that framework, the PROs have to sort of operate and drive for a circular economy and do all of the things that Graham talked about, which I agree with.
If I can just pick up on something that Archana alluded to, that the legislative framework is still geared to meet minimum targets, and if the people in Brussels are talking the circular economy, but they're passing legislation for minimum recycling targets, and we somehow need to bridge this gap so that the legislative framework is driving towards circularity. And I challenged them in the workshop yesterday, saying, well, where's the vision? Where's the vision of what circularity looks like? And it was a deathly hush. So I explained to them what circularity looked like.
There's a lot of discussions about circularity, and people might differ in opinions. And I still find people that they think that circularity is that you make the same stuff from the waste you make, instead of looking at let's say the quality of the recyclate, where it is find the best solution for that. There's a different type of thinking. So
Monica wanted to come in.
Yeah.
I just let Monica respond.
Thank you. I just wanted to reinforce the message and what Chris and also Archana Graham have just said about the precious function of EPR system, as it is a kind of coordinator. Actually, they are the one who have as the owner the industry, so they talk to the industry. They know what the industry needs. They know what the brand owner and the people who do the job of producing packaging need. They talk to the legislator, and rather than being a passive subject in this discussion with the legislator, the position should be a little bit more active, proactive. So in a way that actually when we have the legislative framework, it is actually responding the needs of the industry. It's not something that you find there and you just receive as something that it's received in a passive way.
Yeah. So it feels to me as though we have a lot of consensus about what we would like EPR to look like and how it should operate. It strikes me that maybe the biggest question for us is how do we get there, and who are the stakeholders that we need to be listening to this message, and what roles would all of the different stakeholders play in bringing this about? I'm hearing a lot about legislators. Does everyone agree that the prime orchestrator of this change that we want is at the governmental level?
I wouldn't agree. I think in the past, industry has looked to government, either local or European, to set targets, and we've argued to keep those as low as possible. That's not the message that we get from the companies that participate in CEFLEX. They want to go circular, and I think probably for the first time ever are willing to set the circularity goal for EPR systems by themselves without being kicked, dragging, and screaming to the table. It's a case of we want this, guys, and so we need people like Archana and her colleagues and the other big brand owners and retailers who have, in some countries, a seat on the board of the EPR systems, to take them a recipe and say, here it is. In fact, maybe it's not a recipe. Maybe it's a piece of music, because the way I see the EPRs evolving is from being a cog in the wheel into being the conductor of the orchestra, and pulling the different parts of the industry in and making sure that they play together to deliver this circular economy. So I think that's still a challenge. We haven't done this in industry before, but what CEFLEX is trying to do is to produce that piece of music, and to give it, and with our brand owner support, to go to each of the EPR systems and say, this is what we want. And if we have all the players coming with the same piece of music, we have a chance of making the changes voluntarily for the first time.
Mm-hmm. Archana brought up the issue of harmonization, and I think it was Chris at the start who talked about the way that various national schemes are run in different ways and perhaps are answerable to different stakeholders. Is this approach that you've just articulated, Graham, something that is likely to work everywhere, or do we still need a level of European pressure to help harmonize this approach internationally?
Was it for me or for Chris?
Well, actually, anyone who has a view on that.
Well, if I take the floor too much, please interfere. But I think there should be a minimum standard in the way we have the governance organized for EPR. And as I said in the beginning, there are different economies currently with mostly an organization in between dealing with the fee, the money that is coming in, paying the waste treatment stages. I think what I see from a little bit of a distance, because I'm not all day busy with EPR in the Netherlands, but what I see is that on the one hand, industry says we want to go circular. But on the other hand, they also say, but the sorters and recyclers has to fulfill the obligations to cope with that. So we are not, well, we're here in this arena, we are rather having a consensus, but in practice, many companies feel very comfortable with just paying and doing nothing. So I still think that there should be a minimum of obligations to the industry to get the governance of the total of the EPR system working. And still you are responsible, in my opinion, you're still responsible for the stuff you make until it is a new product. And every step before that, you are still responsible for the molecules you put on the market.
I would agree with that, and but counter that. That's why we have EPR systems to carry out that responsibility collectively, and they're not structured today to be able to do that. In fact, there's always a pressure on costs for the PROs, but now we know what we need them to do. We need to structure them so that they can do it.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So, what about other stakeholders? If we've talked about the legislative tier, what about the value chain? What role can packaging producers and brand owners play in pushing EPR systems in the right direction? Monica, how, as a packaging converter, do you feel that Taghleef Industries can help positively impact this?
Well, we actually have a dialogue, open dialogue with pros in the countries where we actually sell our products, and mainly because we, as a company, are also located in Italy. We talk to PRO in Italy, but not only, in France as well. And the thing that is most, I would say, frustrating for us is that we see that there are different approaches when it comes to flexible packaging. And I'm not talking about recyclability, I'm talking about the fees themselves, which of course, we all know that they are reflecting also the state of the art when it comes to recyclability. But sometimes it is very difficult to justify where there's an approach in one country and there's a different approach in another country. And this is also what makes it difficult for us to support the customer, because the first question the customer is asking you is not only is it recyclable, is it suitable with existing recycling stream, but what about the fee? How is it treated in this country, in that country? And you see that sometimes it is really puzzling to say, well, this is treated in a nice way in this country, but in the other one you are just the opposite, just because they don't care about taking care of the flexible packaging. So they privilege, or they give higher value, for instance, to rigid packaging. We try to open the dialogue in many different ways, but I must say it is difficult. So the only thing we can do is bring the experience and to show that it is possible to have a value and to have circularity out of the packaging. This is why we're also deeply involved in CEFLEX as well, for instance, to show that it is possible to close the loop if the money that you put for the fees are invested to create the right conditions to sort, to collect, first of all. And even if from this perspective it is quite challenging, I can speak maybe for experience, because here in Italy, you move from a village, I'm not talking of a town, a village to another, and the system of collection is totally different. So you can imagine how difficult it is for the consumer, for the citizen, to understand why a certain package is treated in one way in one village, and in another one it is not possible to put it into the same container, for instance. So we need to make it life easier for the consumers, who are the one who are actually putting their waste, and the money that we put for the fees should be used to improve on that technology, to make sure that really the circularity, all the efforts that we do as an industry, paying the fees, supporting the circularity, so making use even of recycled content, actually is fruitful, and there's some kind of reaction on the other side, positive reaction, I would say.
Thank you. And yeah, Archana, the same question to you really. How would you like to impact as a brand owner on improving this?
So, I mean, apart from what I mentioned earlier, which is we're on the boards of a lot of these organizations, we're actively running projects with a lot of these organizations. I think the responsibility of the brand owners often stems from the eco design. But what's frustrating from a brand owner perspective is, even if you sort of work with CEFLEX and comply with the sort of design for recycling guidelines that we've drafted together with CEFLEX, it's considered very differently in different markets. Some markets eco-modulate, some markets don't, some markets consider the design guidelines, some markets don't. And we have to get to a place where doing the right thing is seen as a positive, right? It's not swept under the carpet. So this concept of eco-modulation is really important. So every material needs to pay for its net costs of collection and sorting, but also taking into account the revenue from the sales of the sorted plastic waste. So in theory, if you have put packaging on the market that's easier to recycle, and the EPR scheme recognizes that stream as easier to recycle, it will have a better economic value at the end of the chain, and therefore the fees that you have to subsidize will be lower. But not every EPR scheme in Europe is there today. So we're working with all of the schemes to say, we need a set of consistent guidelines. We need eco-modulation in place that then allows the whole value chain to develop, allows for investment to flow into sorters, into recyclers, allows for long-term contracts and guarantees to them to be able to put in the investments required to generate the high quality recyclate that's required. So I guess it's, the answer to your question is, well, it starts from the eco design, but sometimes putting out a design for recycling product in the market is not enough. We have to follow through with the EPR schemes to make sure that that stream is recognized and that product is actually recycled through the system.
Thank you. And Graham, obviously representing a large part of the flexibles value chain at CEFLEX, does CEFLEX at organizational level have a close dialogue with EPR schemes across Europe? And do you feel as though that's a dialogue that needs to be strengthened? Is it functional at the moment in the way you would like it to be?
The short answer is no. We have good contacts with a number of EPR schemes, but there are some huge white spots that we don't interact with in a proactive way, including the for-profit schemes. So we have a number of EPR systems participating in CEFLEX via the Expo organization, and we have direct links to them. But we're only really getting to a stage now where we feel in a position to work with them as partners to explain what we think is necessary and how we can help them fill those gaps. We have cost models that will tell you how to get flexible packaging to different quality levels via a mechanical recycling process. We will top that up with the chemical required recycling module so that we understand how to get the different qualities and what it costs. And these have been developed in conjunction with the collector sorters and recyclers, and they're very detailed. but they can be customized for each country. So we will be in a position to say, if you recycle flexible packaging back to this quality, this is what it's going to cost the recycler given this type of technology. And therefore, if you want them to be able to make a profit, then this is the kind of margins that are going to be interesting to them. And if it's still higher than virgin, you're going to have to top that up to make sure that the sales price is at parity or lower than virgin. So we now have that capability. We're starting to develop the next capability as to what kind of recycling and sorting infrastructure do we need. So we briefly discussed at our last general meeting about Archana telling Monica what her requirements are in terms of different plastic grades for the flexible packaging, and how much of that is food contact, how much can be non-food contact. And so then Monica can take a look at all of her customers and say, well, actually, I'm going to need that much mechanical recycling capacity, that much chemical recycling capacity, and I want to deliver it by 2025, Mr. EPR system. And if all of the converters go back to the EPR systems, and we can bring that picture together, it helps them to understand what they're going to need and how to design the system so that it's funded appropriately. So the short answer to your question is no, but.
Thank you. And I wonder, from a EPR scheme's point of view, what do we know about the pain points that the people in the inside of EPR are facing, and perhaps the barriers that they face to applying the kinds of more targeted or eco-modulation based approaches to closing that circle? Chris, obviously you're close to the Dutch EPR scheme. Do you have any insights into that?
As far as I can talk about, well, this is, of course, we still have some struggles in practice, and one of the struggles is that we have a modulated scheme for better recyclable packaging materials. But even if you have that, you still have discussions and claims from individual companies saying, well, I'm not complying with the scheme, but I claim to be recyclable because I have this test report. And there are a lot of different claims coming forward. So we have a lot of discussions how to cope with that kind of new ideas. And it is also going very fast. We now have a discussion on glues and on whether they are cold washable or not, or should be cold washable or not. So there are a lot of technical items still in discussion. What kind of chemicals are allowed or are disturbing the whole system? We are not very clear on that still. We know a lot, but not everything is well known. And in general, I think that the main problem currently is that we don't have the right steering wheel in hands to say what kind of innovation is needed to make the first big steps. And so in general, we say all packaging has to be good recyclable. Of course, we have a recycle check, or we have guidelines for that, and everybody can look at that and use it. But still, then the next step is, how do you improve? What is your own design for recycling step in the best sense to be safe for the next, let's say, 5 or 10 years? Because if you change your packaging line and you change from PP to PE or the other way around, there's lots of discussions on that, because you don't that overnight. You know, it costs a lot of money to change your package line. So one of the questions we always get from industries, also from big companies, is what are we heading for? What's our future look like? If we are willing to change, but if you can't predict what is the situation in 5 or 10 years, I won't move, because I don't know if my investment is well considered. So and that is, I think, also in the EPR discussions, we are not very clear to predict the situation on the long term. So where should we end? So the discussion on circularity has to be discussed in the EPR schemes. Otherwise, the investments will be postponed.
Thank you. One more question. Thinking about the difference between national schemes across Europe, do we have any examples of really well, or at least relatively well, functioning EPR schemes that people could look to emulate? Are there any that are closer to that ideal than the general average that we've described?
I was impressed by the Belgian FOS Plus scheme, which has at least say the sorting step as being a contract. It's in contract done by 5 or 6 sorting sites from FOS Plus. So FOS Plus has the steering wheel to get these sorting sites produced in a manner that they want. So you can say, I want you to invest on this kind of technology because we need this for our goals in the future. So these are connected to each other. So maybe we should use this FOS Plus scheme as an example. Maybe they can even do more than that, but in the EPR, the waste treatment steps could be in one company, more or less, in one construction or one contract, with the funding organization, PRO organization, paying for that, so that you are the boss of the sorting and recycling, and not just paying to do it, and hopefully the recycler finds a new market for it. No, you have to define the future markets, and you have to produce on the specifications for those markets.
Yeah, I would agree to that, right? All of the PRO schemes have their pros and cons today, but specifically on flexible packaging, we've worked closely with FOS Plus, and FOS Plus have done a really good job of making sure that flexibles are recycled in Belgium. And they've done that because they have higher targets than the minimum EU targets, which really makes a big difference and drives the incentive to begin with. But B, they also have accountability across the whole chain. So as Chris mentioned, they work, work closely to define the exact specifications and outputs of the sorting units. They also work very closely to look at which recyclers those bales should go to. They offer sort of long-term contracts for the waste to go to the recyclers. So there's security of feedstock for the recyclers as well. And they've really taken an end-to-end approach to help develop the recycling system in Belgium. So I think that's definitely one really good example. The Germans have been doing it for decades. They have a pretty efficient system of recycling all kinds of waste. And it's a quite a different system from the rest of Europe in the way it's structured, but in terms of the technologies that they've deployed and how they've thought about the end markets, I think there's a lot that we can learn from them in how they've structured the value chain as well.
Okay, thank you.
I can weigh in there. I think there's a lot of good practice out there, and the FOS Plus system has learned from what the Dutch do and what the Germans do and what the Spanish do, and they fixed some of the areas where more control is needed, and good on them. But I think there is enough good practice out there that can be tweaked to do what's necessary. I think EPR systems have the ability, far more control than they probably think they have. I know in France, CTO, the collection is a municipal or local authority responsibility. They get to decide how to do it, and that's the case in many countries. But CTO said, well, this is what we pay for. We pay for large, fully automated collection and sorting systems. So if you don't want to do it that way, then we don't give you the subsidy. I think we need to recognize where the strengths are, and being the payer is definitely a strength that we need to leverage, because you do need more control. The conductor of the orchestra, when he waves his baton at that part of the orchestra, it needs to work. I don't know whether it would work if we didn't have a baton, but so you need some kind of power, and that power is something that is given to you by the brand owners who and retailers who fund the system. But it is not just them who need to work in harmony or play in harmony. It's the whole value chain, as I mentioned, the film producers and converters, the polymer producers, the recyclers. They're all different parts of the same game, and we need coordination, and that's the challenge in going circular.
Thank you, Graham. So we're coming towards the end of the discussion today. Just in case we've missed anything important, do any of you have any closing thoughts or ideas that you'd like to share with us? I'll give everyone a chance to share their final word. Monica, I invite you to go first.
Yes, what I would like to underline that we as flexible packaging producer, what we are looking for and what we are waiting from the different EPR systems, so in different countries here, is finally a fee which is reflecting the eco design. So eco modulation, we are really in much need. We were expecting this first from Germany when their national law was launched a few years back, and but we are still waiting for that. But we know that finally, apparently, they may be very close to an agreement, because this is actually triggering and consolidating and pushing furthermore for the eco design, because changing for a packaging without knowing what the benefits and without knowing if it's really well accepted, finally at the end of its life will stop all the work of the customers. I mean, of brand owners and retailers. You need to see the purpose. You need to see finally where all your efforts are going. But there's a second part that I would like, we would like to be reflected when talking about eco modulations and the fees, that we should also take into consideration that when we are doing eco design, when we are changing the packaging, we should also be sure that we are not changing for something that is less sustainable. Because what we have seen many times is that there's a kind of reaction to kind of satisfy or meet consumers' expectations. So customers are redesigning their packaging, choosing a different type of material, sometimes even moving from flexible to rigid, just because there's an expectation on the side of the consumer. But the change is not only measured in terms of recyclability, it should also be measured in terms of sustainability. So like, for instance, an LCA tool, if I change for a flexible packaging towards a rigid solution, do I really make the right choice? What is its impact? So maybe we should take into consideration that the packaging itself is not only about recyclability, but it's also about the impact that it has. So a tool like LCA is really proving and showing if you're doing the right thing. And it would be very nice if the eco fees and so EPR would also require and would be very careful about this, because it's very easy, you know, to bypass and do something wrong when you think that you are doing it right.
Thank you, Monica. Chris, do you have a last word for us?
I fully agree with Monica's statement. What I would recommend is we as KIDV as our independent knowledge institute, and we can say anything we want. So we are also I have to say anything I want, because we are not politically constrained, but so I would have I would be in favor for the idea that in different countries we also should organize an independent organization paid by the EPR just to support all kinds of industries to get the right steps for design for recycling, because I think there's a lot of knowledge needed to disseminate to the market. Not everybody knows what the right steps are. As Monica said, sometimes companies make steps to the wrong decisions. They go to paper-based solutions with all kind of new plastics on it, with glues on it, with chemicals on it. They expect it to be more environmental friendly, but they are going from good to bad instead of the other way around. So one of the functions you also need, besides all the things we already mentioned, is that should on a European level a service group or a service organization or a network helping all kind of buyers and companies. We have started an initiative called Pack Forward. Packforward.eu, you can look at that, and we might consider that as being first step to organize it, because I think this is a simple thing to do, but it is also, I think, needed.
Thanks, Chris. And in fact, I was involved in one of your events earlier this year, yeah, I would definitely recommend to our audience that they check out the activities of KIDV, and it's very much a pan-European agenda and relevance and well worth paying attention to and engaging with. Archana, can I ask you for your final thoughts, please?
Yeah, Tim, I think what's really encouraging for me in talking to different players in the value chain and being on panels like this is everyone's agreeing with each other. So, unlike what it was maybe even 2 years ago, the industry, the value chain seems to have coalesced around our vision and what we need to do to drive the outcomes. Now, getting from point A to point B still, I have to admit, feels like an uphill battle at points, which is strange, right? Given that if everyone's driving towards the same thing, it should be easier than it is. But I'm just hopeful that given where we are and given there's so much consensus, we will ultimately get to a good position on EPR and ultimately driving circularity. So I will leave this panel on that positive message.
Thank you, Archana. And Graham, I'll give you the final word.
Oh, thank you, Chris. It also means that all the good points have been taken. I would, yeah, like to just to acknowledge that this is a work in progress. We haven't done this before. There isn't an operating manual. In fact, there's hardly a vision for what the circular economy looks like. So we think we have one, but we need to share that, and we need to get it accepted. And all the different parts of that puzzle need to come together. And if I look at the legislation being developed in the Packaging and Packaging Waste Directive and Waste Framework Directive, we tend to treat all of these things separately. EPRs in one box. What's the definition of recycling and how it fits into the essential requirements? What's the recycled content? These things are not separate entities. They need to be treated as one. And similarly, EPR is probably one of the key enablers of the circular economy. And as such, somehow we have to empower these groups so that they have enough information and the clout to make the right decisions. So as Archana said, it's a coalition of the willing. Everybody is in rude agreement with each other, which is fantastic news. We just need to make it happen. And it's not without its challenges, but I'm pretty confident that we'll get there.
Thank you, Graham. So this is the point where we turn over the agenda to our audience. We've had a lot fewer questions than usual, which possibly reflects what we were reflecting on a little bit earlier, that EPR is maybe it's a topic that isn't appreciated as much as it should be in terms of its importance. And so hopefully the lack of questions reflects the educational role that this discussion can play. But I have two here, that one which is pre-submitted and one that came live, that I'll put to the panel. The pre-submitted question is, can and should EPR play a more proactive role in promoting investment in specific end-of-life technologies, such as sorting, recycling, chemical recycling, etc.?
I have a view if you want me to start off.
Yeah, go on.
Again, this comes back to the understanding of the role of EPR. EPR is not a bank with a bottomless account. But what EPR can do is can say, we can guarantee you a contract for a fixed number of years at a certain margin, and that would have to be linked to the energy price or the virgin price. So it can provide a much lower risk investment opportunity. And as long as the return on that investment is interesting, the money will come. There's enough funds out there for people looking for good investment opportunities. And this could be a fantastic investment opportunity. And EPR has the ability to reduce the risks and the barriers to getting this investment capital for the necessary infrastructure, especially if they can show how it's going to work longer term. Then the money will come. So in terms of the answer to the question, it's EPR has a facilitatory role. It's not going to put the money up.
Okay, thank you. And the other question, this one has come from Julia Koskela, who I recognize the name is from Systemic, and actually participated as a speaker in one of our events in the autumn, talking about ocean plastics. And Julia is asking us, I guess, broadening this from the flexible packaging topic to a broader context, asking, we've seen lots of reuse and refill announcements this month from brands and retailers. How do you see EPR tying into incentivizing reusable and refillable packaging? I guess this is one that I will put to Archana.
Yeah, that's a really good question, right? The EPR has always been, the objective of the EPR system was to ensure that the packaging gets recycled, and we drive a circular economy for packaging. I don't think any of the EPR schemes have necessarily got deeply embedded into reuse and refill models, but as we see them scaling going forward, we will need to think about what is the role of EPR systems in driving the broad infrastructure for these models, right? So, setting up the infrastructure for some of these systems can be quite capital heavy. And the question is, should it be an industry solution on taking back some of the used containers, cleaning, etc., that makes it more efficient for all players involved? And can EPR actually play a role there? But to be honest, I think given the scale of these models is so niche today, I don't think anyone's really looked from an EPR perspective into this in much detail, also because we have sort of all the problems that we've talked about today to fix as priority and front of mind for EPR.
Thank you, Archana. Okay, so I think that's the end of today's session. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. I'll quickly mention that we have lots more live sessions coming up in the next few weeks before we'll break up for our summer holidays, including several interactive Zoom meetings, starting with a session next week with Bostik's Benoit Polacci, who is discussing R&D perspectives on developing innovative adhesives for sustainable packaging. So I guess that's also very interesting when thinking about design for recyclability in flexibles, among other packaging types. That will be 1 week today, next Thursday on the 24th of June at 2 o'clock Brussels time. Remember, you can also watch all of our live content and the growing selection of videos and other types of content on demand anytime on this platform. And you can also browse and network with other event delegates via the attendees link at the top of the page. For now, thank you very much for engaging with us today. And special thanks to our expert speakers, Monica Battistella, Archana Jaganathan, Chris Bruijnes, and Graham Houlder. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.